Hello, I'm Anawultos, and today I will be telling you how leveling makes video game economies unrealistic. So right now I'm looking at the old school RuneScape wiki to give you a little bit of a lowdown on what exactly I'm talking about. So in a video game where there is leveling, particularly leveling based upon raising certain skills, there ends up to be a certain amount of value assigned on the skill leveling in itself. And what we end up here is a situation where, for example, if we take a look at this chart here, for common leveling for the RuneScape crafting skill, what we end up here is that the needle, thread, and lever that you would need to make a pair of leather gloves costs about 182 gold as the materials, but the end product, the actual leather gloves, you can sell that for only 5. Now, of course, theoretically, you could sell it for a lot more if you can really maneuver things well, but this is just the general pricing. So you essentially lose 177 if you purchase the raw materials. Now, in the real world, things are not really... Generally, the cost will not go in this direction. Generally, what happens is that the cost of an end product would almost always be higher, unless it's a waste product, in which case it obviously would be lower. So this is fundamentally an unrealistic situation, which is very interesting because if you actually think about it, levels 1 through 7, the lowest level bracket, even though it doesn't look like it's as high on loss as some of the other methods, if you look at the actual cost per XP, it's a much larger loss compared to any of the other ones, even for more expensive items, which is very interesting. But again, what I'm saying here is that ultimately the value of the materials for leveling is greater than the value of the product for its use, which is, from an economic standpoint, that would be problematic because it would essentially destroy the manufacturing industry. However, because this is a video game and leveling in itself is considered something that is valuable, you can actually see how that there is indeed a motive to have a monetary loss on this. Now, of course, I can understand in real life there are similar situations. For example, there's a high cost for education, and education in theory is similar to leveling without having an immediate profit. However, in the long term, you can then turn that into a situation where you can make a profit. For example, here, if you take this method, you can spend about 8,673 gold to get to a situation where you can make gold bracelets, which are great experience and therefore produce a large amount of money. However, the difference is, here's the difference. The difference here is that in education, there's the outcome of the production of education is a more well-educated individual. So that is the actual denotative outcome of education. Now, of course, it doesn't always work, but that's essential. But I'm speaking from a perspective of if it were to always work. Now, in manufacturing, the outcome is a product that can then be sold for a profit. However, this, of course, is not happening here. So how would you actually fix this in a video game design? Now, unfortunately, I think that this is something that would be very difficult to fix in a video game where leveling is an important motivating factor, such as RuneScape. There are probably ways to do workarounds so that people would gain money. There might be ways to rig the economy, although I don't support rigging the economy in order to make that work. I think that would be problematic for a few different reasons than this. But not that it would make the game unplayable, but rather that it would not really produce a lot of confidence in the economy, which, although it is a video game, I still think that that's somewhat important. But I think one way to do this is to simply move away from the concept of leveling, and instead base the advancement you make in the game not only on quests, as you usually would have, but on privileges and on the player skill. Now, of course, the emphasis on the player skill in an MMO shouldn't be too high, otherwise it becomes prohibitive for new players to enter. But the combination of skillfulness in playing a game, as well as combining that with privileges that are attainable within the game, is something that I think would lead to an economy where the product is generally more valuable than the materials that come in to make the product. Now, what do I mean by privileges? What I mean by a privilege is the idea that, let's say, to access to have a greater and better access to, let's say, a more valuable resource. For example, let's say in the context of fishing, okay? Let's say we have a video game world where there's guilds, in-game NPC-run guilds that have regional monopolies on fishing, that they receive a monopoly from the government, lore-wise, so that they can exclude others from being able to fish in a particular area. So in order for a player to fish in that area, the player would therefore have to acquire the privilege from the guild to be able to do that. Now, from a lore perspective, the reason why a guild would be hesitant to give privilege to a new person, in other words, why the guild would not want to essentially extend the accessibility of its monopoly, is because that would, in theory, threaten the existing members of the guild to competition. In other words, for someone to join, it would have to be profitable for the other members of the guild. So to do that, there would of course have to be an entrance fee, and perhaps membership fees, and of course there might be quests done for the guild and things like that. But joining into the guild and paying the membership fee and entrance fee and things like that would therefore give you the opportunity to enter into a place where you can then, by having made that monetary investment in gaining the privilege, can use your skills in fishing and perhaps equipment to do so in order to gain access to more fish that you can then use as an economic tool to further bolster your status in the guild, or to just simply increase your own wealth in general. In other words, it creates an economic motivation to make money rather than to operate at a loss. So I think that replacing this level-based economy with an economy that has a large emphasis on aspects such as monopolies and having money would in some ways help alleviate the problem that exists wherein the product is more expensive than the raw material, which is a situation that ideally should not exist, at least for realism. Now, of course, you may ask, well, wouldn't people just make a bunch of money and buy access to all the guilds? Now, I think that another thing has to be taken into account, and that is the competition between guilds and the idea that guilds have a sort of exclusivity. So that is to say that, let's say there is a more valuable fish that you now have the money to buy the equipment to perhaps be able to catch the more valuable fish. So what you then have to do is you have to weigh the options, because let's say this fish can only be found within certain other guilds than the one that you're already in. So to do that, you would have to enter the other guild, but the other guild would be hesitant to let you join since you already are a member of a different guild. So then that means that you have to make a decision relating to your investment, that are you willing to continue to invest more in order to gain more status and privileges in your original guild, or are you willing to drop that in order to then make a different investment in order to grow in a different guild? So that creates a choice that players have to make, and that different play styles are going to make different choices. Now, of course, I think another thing that could be done, for example, let's say in a fishing guild, you have the idea that the player on a server that fishes the most within a certain time period can gain special privileges and things like that. That also keeps up a level of competitiveness between players. And although I do believe that actually, I think it's very important that MMOs should, in theory, be not only playable, but fully enjoyable as a single-player experience, but also have a fully playable and enjoyable multiplayer experience. I think that having both is what lends to the longevity of MMOs such as RuneScape, where it is completely possible to play through most of a game on your own without having to necessarily interact with other players. So, and so there's that aspect of it that allows for players that may not have the biggest social skills, or that may not have a lot of time to invest into the game, to still be able to play the game. So I think that's important. But also, you can have events that can be initiated by players where the guilds might become in competition towards another in certain things, and by winning a competition by doing something or completing certain actions, the guilds can therefore temporarily have an advantage in some area. So I think that this really allows for a lot of potential and possibilities, not only concerning video game design, but also enjoyment of the game. Now, moving further onto a different idea, another thing that could be done is players investing in-game currency into other players. So essentially creating a sort of a player-run banking system where players invest money into another player or into, let's say, a player-run organization that then has perhaps something similar to banking, where there's an interest rate and of course withdrawal limits and things like that that can be set up in game, so that those players then, having more money, can use that money to maybe gain a privilege or something to then make more money, which then goes back to the persons that have invested as an investment, and they gain more shares, essentially. So I think that that's an interesting economic aspect that I don't think has really been fully implemented in video games. Now, of course, I understand that things like the Grand Exchange, it's technically possible to invest by trading things and speculating on values and on how things will change in value. But I do believe that actually being able to directly invest into, let's say, a player-run organization, which is more similar to what banking is, as opposed to, let's say, simply investing in an equivalent of a stock market, would actually be a very interesting way to play the game. And at the same time, there might be a system of loaning and things like that. I'm just thinking that there's a whole expansive possibility with video game currency that, in my opinion, has not been fully explored, and that I think it would be very great to see a video game that really explores this in a greater sense, rather than simply having the currency as a means of buying and selling things, actually having the currency being a means to gaining greater advantages in the in-game universe, just like people would use in real life. I think that would be very interesting. Just saying. But tell me what you think. Do you think that this is a good idea, a bad idea? Do you think that there's no problem with having an unrealistic system where raw materials are more valuable than the product? Just tell me what you think, and I'll be happy to hear it. Or perhaps you would like to discuss these issues with me personally. I would be very happy to do so. Maybe even have a video. If you want to discuss something relating to video games, to video game economies, or even to politics and economics in general, I would be happy to do so on my YouTube channel. So feel free to contact me. So thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time on Awultus over and out.